recovery, and as I said, that he will respect the judicial process as Hunter Biden awaits his sentencing, but also considers an appeal. Maria Cardona is a Democratic strategist and CNN political commentator. She joins me now. But Maria, we talked a lot about the effect of Trump's felony conviction on his election chances. This is, of course, different. It's not the president himself. It's the president's son, but it is the president's son here. And I wonder, do you see political damage, political impact for President Biden from this conviction?
I don't see any political damage for President Biden, notwithstanding what Republicans will probably try to do to inflict some of that damage. But I think the American people will see through that. And frankly, I think Republicans could suffer from a backlash if they try to politicize this too much, because as you know, Jim, so many American families feel the relevancy of what the Biden family is going through right now. And especially with the public remarks that President Biden has focused on, and that is not so much him as president of the United States, but Joe Biden as a father, Joe Biden as a dad who is standing by his son, who has said that he is proud of him, that he is proud of the man that he has become, understanding everything he has gone through and the family has gone through throughout Hunter Biden's recovery. And I think importantly also, Jim, the fact that President Biden has said that he is not going to intervene in any of this, that he's going to respect the outcome, that he is not going to pardon his son, even if he is convicted. And we just saw that he is. You know how tough that would be. And you know, if the tables were turned, somebody like Donald Trump would never, ever have the ability to say something like that. And in fact, we already see Donald Trump saying that if he wins, he's going to pardon the January 6th quote unquote warriors and hostages that he believes they are, because he doesn't care about the country. He doesn't care about American voters. He doesn't care about our democracy. He doesn't care about our Constitution. He only cares about himself. He only cares about staying out of prison. And that is the stark contrast that we are seeing between Donald Trump and Joe Biden today.
Well, Donald Trump did respond to this conviction today, and his statement raised again, without basis, an allegation that, well, this case, though prosecuted by Joe Biden's DOJ against his own son, somehow is a distraction from his unfounded claims about a Biden crime family. But there was something notable that our team discovered. The initial statement supplied to CNN included a line in there of sympathy to some degree for Hunter Biden, kind of wishing him well. And then that statement was retracted, that line taken out. What's your reaction to that? Wow. There was one line of kindness in there, and that was removed.
That is, it would be surprising if we didn't already know who Donald Trump was at his core. And I believe that who he is at his core is pretty much a putrid human being. I think that original statement, Jim, probably came from his team, probably came from his smart strategists who are trying to protect him from himself. And then Donald Trump gets a hold of the statement and says, no, I'm not going to say anything about feeling bad or having sympathy for Hunter Biden. We know he doesn't have a sympathetic bone or blood cell in his body. And I think at the end of the day, Jim, that is what the American people are going to see in terms of the contrast between, again, President Joe Biden and somebody like Donald Trump. You know that elections are all about the future, but they're also all about a voter's gut. And when people are going to go into that ballot box in November, you know that the vast majority of them are going to want somebody in the White House that they can feel good about, that they can say, this person understands the humanity with which so many of us have to live our lives. That person is not going to be Donald Trump.
There's been some data, some polling since Donald Trump's own conviction showing a shift in the horse race numbers on the race, but not a big one, a couple of points in Joe Biden's favor. You have to imagine a different time a felony conviction might have a bigger impact. But do you consider that shift a significant one and a lasting one? Because 2 points, it's not a lot.
Sure. I do, only because I think it's going to continue to shift in President Biden's favor in time, Jim, because not a whole lot of time has passed since those 34 felony convictions that a jury of Donald Trump's peers decided that that's what he deserves based on all of the evidence. I think it's going to take time to sink in. I believe that the majority of Americans still have not completely tuned in to this election, have not completely tuned into every single detail. And so I think those numbers in favor of Joe Biden are going to continue to grow. But I also believe, and I think this is critical and important and smart, that the Biden campaign is not counting on this conviction in order to win them the election. And I think that's really smart, right? Because it has never been part of their strategy to count on any of Donald Trump's legal woes or troubles. It is a good contrast to use and for his supporters to use, and they will. But the Biden campaign is focused on delivering their own message, their own accomplishments, and frankly, the contrast. And this conviction does help with that contrast between somebody who is focused on delivering for the American people every single day and somebody who wants to destroy our democracy and only talks about revenge, vengeance, and retribution. And that's a great contrast that I believe at the end of the day, Joe Biden will win in November.
Maria Cardona, Democratic strategist, thanks so much.